Okay, I've been told to talk. Good morning, one and all. Thanks for coming back. We were commenting yesterday on just how exciting it was not only to have so many people in the room at the beginning of the day, but to have so many people in the room at the end of the day and through dinner. And I would imagine there was a fair amount of sociability after the fact also. So I think it was one of the highest energy and most exciting and most satisfying EVN conference days ever, and I want to thank you all for participating in that. I feel I should take a moment to do something which thankfully is not common for EVN. EVN obviously is all about election verification, but we're also very much about human kindness, because kindness is what makes our work possible, and kindness is what makes our lives together worthwhile. And with that in mind, I want to take a moment to lift up the people of New Zealand who have been affected by the mosque shootings. Last I saw, 49 confirmed dead, many injured, families and friends and neighbors, first responders and medical personnel, and everyone who rushes to help when terrible things happen, and everyone who is afraid, grieving, perhaps enraged, or just at a loss to know how to respond at a time like this. So if you'll join me in a moment of silence for everyone affected by the shootings. Thank you for being with me this morning. I really appreciate your friendship. I have a list of things to remind you, and there may be one or two things I need to add to the list. First of all, we do have a tight schedule. We have another jam-packed series of sessions and presenters. So we will try to give really clear time checks about when we want you back in the room. Please help us out. I know that our time together talking individually is very important, but being together in here is also important. Please turn off your cell phone ringers. No one needs to hear Brahms or Mozart or whatever in the middle of a speech. If you can sit on your hands, if you feel the impulse to check your email, that would often be helpful. On the other hand, if you feel like tweeting something that you've heard in the room that is terrific, great, please do. And remember, the hashtag for that is EVN2019. Use it early and often. Did everyone see the ducks? Dana, who has been, this is not her first rodeo, but Dana asked me, what's with the ducks? I said, Dana, how could you not know the ducks? We've had the ducks for over a decade. I have 30 ducks. No, okay, I didn't say that. There may have been times when I brought my daughters a few extra ducks. That could have happened. Okay, so the concept of the ducks is, first of all, they're presidential. They're awesome. They're a memento, and they are quid pro quack, as we were saying over breakfast. Quid pro quack. Please submit your conference evaluation and take a duck. And that way we'll not only remember you, and you'll remember us, but we will be informed by your insights about what has gone well and what to be adjusted. You're probably getting tired of hearing me thank the sponsors, Microsoft Research, Verified Voting, and the OSED Institute, but I did it anyway. Because Eddie does the last round of thanks, I'll exercise my prerogative briefly to thank Purvi Vora and Liz Howard for their phenomenal efforts, Elaine and Wanda, who can't be with us, and Andrea for all their help in putting things together and keeping them moving. And once more, all of you for making this event actually an event. And last but not least, lunch is at 12:45, something to look forward to.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I'm so happy to introduce Maryland Senator Will Smith. I first met Senator Smith when my super duper congressman, that would be Representative Raskin, suggested I talk to him about Maryland's insecure absentee ballot delivery system. He was great. Senator Smith was born and raised in Silver Spring, Maryland. He attended the College of William and Mary and then enrolled in Army Corps and then worked at the ACLU as a legislative assistant. He earned a master's degree from Johns Hopkins University and a law degree from Williams and Mary. Senator Smith was commissioned as an officer in the U.S. Navy Reserve, a position which he continues to serve today. In 2010, he received a White House appointment to serve as director at the Department of Homeland Security under President Barack Obama. In 2014, Senator Smith was elected to represent District 20, Congressman Raskin's old district, in the Maryland House of Delegates. And now he's an up-and-coming star in the Senate. Today, Senator Smith continues to practice law as a civil rights attorney. And I almost forgot to mention one of his most important qualifications. He and our own Liz Howard have been friends since law school. Please give a warm welcome to Senator Will Smith.
Well, good morning. Thank you, Lynn, for the introduction. I want a duck now, I guess. Do I get a duck for speaking today? So I'm a state senator from Montgomery County, and as you heard, I came to the Senate after Congressman Raskin took off and went to Washington, D.C. Today, it's my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce him. And I first met Congressman Raskin when I was in law school at William and Mary. I came up to D.C. at WCL, had a chance to sit in on a couple of classes, and we stayed in touch. And after law school, I ran one of his campaigns. I helped run his re-election campaign to the Senate. And soon thereafter, I ran for the House of Delegates on his ticket. And I won, and we served together for 2 whole years before you went off to Congress. And then I succeeded him in the state Senate. Now, when I did that, all I heard was that I had these really, really big shoes to fill. Everyone told me this, and it was for good reason. During his time in the state Senate, he led the fight to repeal the death penalty in Maryland. He also was the leader for marriage equality in Maryland, the DREAM Act, the Firearms Safety Act, helped raise the minimum wage, and restored voting rights to ex-felons in Maryland. And that is just the short list. So let's give him a round of applause for all that. So not only was I told that I had these really big shoes to fill because of his legislative accomplishments, but even just last week, even to this day, this elderly couple was coming through the halls of Annapolis, and they made their way back to the District 20 senator's office, my office. And the way that my office is situated, it's such that I can hear people at the front, but they can't quite see me. Lynn, you know, you've been there. So I'm sitting at my desk, and this couple is bickering back and forth, and they're talking to my legislative aide, and they're saying, yes, I'm looking for our state senator from District 20. The name is on the tip of my tongue. He's this brilliant lawyer. He's got, gorgeous dark curly hair, and he's got these beautiful blue eyes. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm writing on my desk. I'm like, okay, So I start making my way, and then they both looked at each other at the same time and said, Jamie Raskin. So it wasn't me. It was Jamie Raskin. They're still looking for you down in Annapolis. But I do want to talk a little bit about the work that Congressman Raskin has done on the federal level, because we've actually taken some of what he did not only in Annapolis, but some of the models that he's implemented or tried to implement and is in the process of implementing on the federal level. Maryland, we've moved forward not only with expanding voting rights for ex-felons, but last year we passed and are in the process of implementing automatic voter registration. And obviously, with all these same-day registration, we're also in the process of implementing and moving forward legislation for same-day voter registration. With all these new advancements, though, we all know that there are new obstacles for voter security. And this year, we're entertaining legislation that mirrors what Congressman Raskin has on the federal level. We have before us in the state Senate, Senator Paul Pinsky has a piece of legislation that would require our vendors that are in control of our voting machines to have disclose whether they are either owned wholly or in part by a foreign entity or a foreign individual. Also disclose the components. I mean, it mirrors exactly the federal legislation that Jamie is proposing at the federal level. So we are still taking our cues from Jamie in Maryland. And it is my honor and my pleasure to give you Jamie Raskin so that he can speak a little bit more about his federal work. So without further ado, I give you Congressman Jamie Raskin, my good friend and mentor, Congressman Jamie Raskin.
Wow. Well, I can guarantee you that my remarks today do not justify an introduction, much less an introduction by the star of the Maryland State Senate today. But I'm very honored that Will would come by en route to Annapolis to introduce me. And I just want to say, you know, of all of the achievements that Will mentioned, and you notice he was kind enough just to talk about what I did in Annapolis because I don't really have any yet in Washington. But that of all of them, nothing makes me prouder than to have recruited my protege to take my place in the Maryland Senate and several other really excellent people in the District 20 delegation, because they are the best testament to what progressive politics can do. Will's actually on his way in just 2 weeks, 1 week. To Afghanistan, because he is in the Naval Intelligence Reserve and he's been deployed to Afghanistan. So let's thank him for his extraordinary service here in Maryland, as well as his service to America. All right. Well, I'm so delighted to be with everybody here. And speaking of fraud, I feel a little bit fraudulent here today because everybody in the room, I can guarantee you, knows a lot more about computer election security than I do. So I've come to learn, and I am very much looking forward to collecting all of the proceedings of this investigation this weekend and incorporating into the work I do. So if you would indulge me, I want to make just a few points. And one is constitutional in nature, one is political in nature, one is about science, and then one will be about what's happening legislatively and what we should be working on going forward. So that's what I'm planning to do. And this is only an attempt to say something that actually adds to what's going on here, because I don't think I'm going to be able to improve upon the expertise that's in the room in terms of actual computer security and the technological insulation of our voting systems. But my constitutional point is this. Well, why are we in the situation that we're in the United States with respect to the vulnerability of our election systems? And the point I want to make is that our Constitution did not establish, when it began, a right of everybody to vote. This was something that was left entirely to the states. So if you look in Article 1 of the Constitution, the people who get to vote for Congress are the people who are given the right to vote for the upper house of the state legislature in the state where they live, which was an explicit delegation to the states to determine who would have the right to vote in federal elections. And our whole electoral process has grown up around that structural delegation. So even today, we have not one voting system or election system in the United States of America. We have thousands of voting systems and thousands of electoral jurisdictions across the country. You might say, well, we've got really 51, you got 50 states, you got the District of Columbia, but in fact, many of the states have done exactly what the Constitution did, which is to delegate further down the road. So you get local fragmentation and decentralization of voting systems, and that was depicted perhaps most vividly in the 2000 election in Florida, where we saw that, there were different kinds of ballots that appeared in different counties, different voting systems that appeared in different counties, different voting practices that appeared in different counties. And, all of this relates to the determination first to give the states political power over the national government, and then within the states to empower local counties, sheriffs, political elites to govern over a broader political canvas. Now, obviously, I don't have time to tell the whole story of the struggle to rectify that imbalance. I will, I'm here as an ardent Democrat, so I thought I would try to invoke a more bipartisan note by referencing our last great Republican president, Abraham Lincoln, who spoke of government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and that has been sort of the dynamic motor force in American history, the attempt to bring government closer to all of the people on an inclusive basis. But we've made some great progress along those lines with the Civil War, the Reconstruction Amendments, the 14th Amendment Equal Protection Clause, the 15th Amendment striking down voting discrimination based on race, the 17th Amendment establishing direct election of U.S. senators against state legislative control of appointment of senators, the 19th Amendment giving us women's suffrage, the 23rd Amendment giving people here in D.C. the right to participate in presidential elections, the 24th Amendment banning poll taxes in federal elections, and the 26th Amendment lowering the voting age to 18 in federal elections. The trajectory of our constitutional development has been trying to rectify the original error of not establishing a right to vote in a national electoral process, but it's a ragtag series of ad hoc anti-discrimination amendments we've got, and we still don't have the direct enfranchisement of all of the American people at every level of government, which is why we continue to have large disenfranchised populations, including people right here in Washington, D.C., who have no voting representation in Congress, the people in the territories in Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, the Virgin Islands, former prisoners who continue to be disenfranchised in 7 or 8 states, and then the general vulnerability and weakness of election systems across the country, which is the general background problem of what we've done. Most countries on earth, like our neighbors, Canada and Mexico, have national electoral commissions which are charged with nothing other than making sure that there are fair elections and enforcing those elections. In America, we've got nothing like that. The only really permanent administrative body we've got dealing with that is the Federal Election Commission, which is charged exclusively with enforcing campaign finance laws and is designed very effectively to be completely dysfunctional and is unable to do anything. And so that's completely frozen. The Election Assistance Commission, which was created back in 2000 after the debacle of the presidential election, has been set up to try to channel money into the states, which is the first time in American history where federal money has gone to try to improve state, local, county election procedures. And I was proud to introduce legislation for a $1.2 billion infusion of money. We didn't get that, but we got $380 million to try to fortify the states that did go out before the 2018 election. But you can see how ramshackle and kind of spotty and erratic our investment in the election system is. There are, a lot of countries will, like Mexico, has a national electoral commission, which is like the Supreme Court. And these are independent, nonpartisan figures who are charged with just making sure that there's a fair election. And we don't have that. And that's why we're in the situation we're in. And we depend so much on civil society and the kind of activists and scholars in this room to make the election systems resemble something that people would consider fair and just. So that's just to say, when we ultimately deal with this problem, there's going to have to be a constitutional parameter to it. We're going to need an establishment of a constitutional right of everybody to vote and everybody to have their votes counted fairly in an electoral process that is fair and coherent. And then we are going to need a national electoral commission so the ballots look the same and are fair across the country, and people don't feel as if their votes are being diluted by corruption and mischief taking place in other parts of the country. That's my constitutional point. Okay, here's my political point. Today, we live in a time of rising, terrorism, as we were reminded as recently as last night or early this morning. rising authoritarianism, rising fascism, rising racism, rising anti-Semitism. So the ghosts of the 20th century are back now here. And the authoritarian governments and the autocrats and the despots and the movements that they back have targeted the democracies at our Achilles heel, which is our technological vulnerability. I've sat through many hearings now where we've tried to figure out what's happened in the 2016 presidential election, although it was very difficult with the GOP control of the House over the last 2 years to get the real information. But we're piecing it together, and the best that I can understand it is Vladimir Putin, the former chief of the KGB, who's made his career in intelligence in Russia, conducted the greatest active measure intelligence campaign in the history of Russia against America and against other democracies. And he basically said to himself, well, we're not going to be able to beat the Americans militarily because we're vastly outspent by the American military-industrial complex, and we're not going to be able to beat the Americans economically because America is a powerhouse and their economy is, 5% the size of ours or what have you. And they're not going to be able to beat us intellectually at the realm of ideas because democracy still continues to be the life hope of civilization. And what does Russia have to sell in terms of kleptocracy to the rest of the world? But he figured, here's our Achilles heel, the internet. Putin, for a fraction of the money that he would have to spend on a military campaign to try to challenge the U.S. and his allies, can invest in modes of destabilization and modes of espionage through the internet to destabilize the American political society and other democracies, as well as target their elections directly. And so he created something like a Manhattan Project for internet destabilization of the democracies with their Internet Research Agency and other active measure intelligence campaigns. And what we saw in 2016, at the very least, because it's just becoming clear now, was the hacking into the DNC computers, the disclosure of tens of thousands of emails through WikiLeaks and other sources, orchestrated campaign to use those leaks to change the direction of the campaign to propel the Trump candidacy against the Clinton candidacy, then a propaganda campaign through Facebook, Twitter, and other avenues in social media to pump ideological poison into the American body politic, which succeeded in deeply polarizing our society and embittering different groups against each other, and then direct attempts to get into different state election boards and state election systems. That's a pretty scary picture when you think about it, precisely because of the vulnerability of our electoral systems, as well as our political systems, and the demobilization of critical thinking in the society, okay, which leads to my third point, which is about science. Science and reason are very much under attack in America today. We are clearly living through our first post-literate presidency, by which I mean we have a president who doesn't read books, he doesn't read magazines or newspapers, everything is TV. It's just TV images nonstop, and that leads to the collapse of critical thinking skills, and it leads to a loss of historical memory and a sense of political context for those things that are happening. We are in a struggle to defend science and to defend rational ways of approaching public problems. This was the whole promise of the Enlightenment and of the American experiment. This is what America is, right? Our founders, beginning with Thomas Jefferson, wanted to found a government based on the principles of reason and science. That was the whole idea behind America. That was the idea behind the separation of church and state. They were rebelling against centuries of religious warfare between the Catholics and the Protestants in Europe, and they wanted everybody to be able to develop his or her own relationship with God as a private matter, as a personal matter between them and God, them and their religion. But they wanted government to be based on a rational principle and to be based on science. And as Neil deGrasse Tyson said, the great thing about science is it's true whether or not you believe in it, you know, and which it's kind of the obverse of the point that that's made by a great story about Niels Bohr, where the way I heard it was some people came over to his house for dinner. They were leaving, and one of his guests looked above the doorway and saw a horseshoe, and the woman says to him, Niels, you know, here you are, the greatest physicist of the 20th century, and you've got a horseshoe above your door. That's amazing. I never took you to be the superstitious type. And he said, no, I'm not superstitious. They say it works whether or not you believe in it. But anyway, but we know from climate change that we're in this massive struggle to defend science against the idea that reality is whatever we want it to be. So if we simply decree there's no climate change, well, then we don't have to worry about hundreds of thousands of acres of forest fire in California, or the glaciers collapsing, or the walruses disappearing, or the polar bears drowning, or record drought, record flooding, islands disappearing into the sea, and so on. Well, I think we're in exactly the same situation with respect to our elections, that there are people who just want us to rely on magical thinking. If we just believe, then everything's going to be okay. And then meantime, there are these extraordinary vulnerabilities that take place, and increasingly bad actors from around the world who have found each other, whether it's Putin in Russia, or Orban in Hungary, or Duterte in the Philippines, or Erdogan in Turkey, the homicidal crown prince of Saudi Arabia. You name it, the enemies of authentic political democracy are out there, and they have found each other, and they've also connected with the right-wing movements within the democratic societies that want to destabilize the elections. So, well, what are we going to do about it? I guess, but I'll mention one piece of legislation I've got that Senator Smith mentioned, but you'll see it's a very small part of a bigger picture, and I want to leave you with a challenge. But the Election Vendor Security Act, which I introduced last year, simply says that election vendors in the United States have to be election vendor companies have to be owned by U.S. citizens and not by foreign nationals. And if there are any foreign parts, hardware or software, used in their work on our elections, that's got to be disclosed, so we're aware of what it is and where it's coming from. This is, I think, the most minimal thing that we can do. I introduced legislation after it was revealed that one of the Russian oligarchs close to Vladimir Putin was a principal owner of Maryland's election vendor, the people that we had contracted with to help us on our election systems in Maryland, is wrapped up in the Putin network, which obviously sent chills down everybody's spines. And so we want to bring exposure to that situation, but we want to at least establish that the people who've been outsourced election duties, if we must do that, are people who are U.S. citizens, so at least they're responsible to our laws and face the consequences of their action under our justice system. But look, the truth is that we, because of the decentralized and vulnerable character of our election processes, we haven't totally begun to conceptualize what needs to be done. And I guess my challenge to you, or my humble request to you, is to come up with something like a comprehensive electoral strategy, or a comprehensive electoral reform strategy for the cyber age. What really needs to be done as quickly as possible to prevent the kinds of intrusions and invasions we saw in 2016, which may just be a modest dress rehearsal for what's coming in 2020 or 2024, especially with the very sad fact, but the unavoidable fact, that we do not have political unanimity in America. We don't have a consensus, either that this happened yet, or that it is a profound threat to all of us, regardless of whether we're Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Greens, Independents, or whatever. You would think, one would hope, that we would have a unanimous resolve in the country against these threats to American political independence and sovereignty, but we don't. And we continue to have contests just over what happened and what the facts are, and a constant undertow of doubt and skepticism about it, despite the overwhelming evidence that we've received already. Well, if I'm one of the political enemies of democracy, then I'm going to view that as an invitation to keep going. If the polarization and the division that we wanted to prey upon was in fact exacerbated by the invasion. So I don't mean to put too heavy of a burden on everybody, but it does seem like the whole world is watching what we do, and I think that all of you guys have a critical role to play. And so I expect a complete, comprehensive report on my desk Monday morning from you guys about what needs to be done. Thank you very much for having me and for sharing this time. I appreciate it. So, and I can't remember, Lynn, was I supposed to take questions? Do we want to have a conversation? Or so, oh, good.
Yeah, could you take questions?
Sure, yeah.
Awesome. So,
I've got 7 minutes.
so Rebecca, you know Rebecca?
Is it on? I just want to give a shout out to Congressman Raskin, who in his first session as a newly elected state senator in Maryland helped us pass our paper ballots bill, and that was 2007. He then helped us for the following 9 years as we fought to get funding and get implementation of that bill. So in 2016, we finally voted on paper, and that's when you got elected to Congress.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you. Well, I totally appreciate it. It was a great pleasure and honor to work on that. And you did a fantastic job. Fantastic.
Hi, I'm Susan Greenhalgh, the Policy Director for the National Election Defense Coalition. Thank you so much for your remarks, and they're so spot on. One thing that I have to say drives me personally crazy is that you rightly point out that there's a problem of people not accepting science. And part of the problem is that we're seeing that people at some of the highest levels of election administration are unwilling to accept, and not everybody, but I'm going to speak specifically about the Election Assistance Commission, is that the chair went to Congress a couple weeks ago and said that you can audit a direct recording electronic piece of equipment, which is a flawed position, highly flawed. So while that continues to be propagated at some of the highest levels, we're going to continue to hit obstacles trying to achieve the end goals that we all need to do for security. And I'm wondering, how can we overcome that? Is there some way that Congress can help also overcome that resistance to the basic science, which is well documented?
Well, so was that contradicted at the time? Was there?
Well, the Congress member who asked the question, I think, expected it to be
Did you know, where was the testimony? Because I'm trying to. Homeland Security? Okay, well, one thing we should do is definitely make sure we correct the record, as quickly as we can about that. Yeah. I missed that, but we should definitely try to correct the record as quickly as possible. And I don't know which are the national groups that the people in the room work most closely with in terms of representation before Congress. Because it seems to me that there's a need to get the surplus of knowledge and expertise in this room connected to, I don't know if it's Common Cause or it's
Common Cause, Verified Voting, National Election Defense Coalition.
Yeah.
We all Brennan Center.
Yeah, but the Brennan Center. I think that the election reform groups, the coalition that formed for HR 1, which has some good provisions about this stuff, really it needs the expertise of the people in the room. Yeah. So to be connected there to make sure that the science is being fairly represented. And
well, we're doing that a lot. A lot of the people that are mentioned, I'm afraid for people that I didn't mention, I apologize for that. But if there's any way that Congress can help facilitate getting that more and more, we're people like Alex Halderman are testifying before Congress.
Yeah.
More of that.
Well, I totally agree. And what we need this. We don't need the science to be politicized, but we need the scientists to be politicized. That is, we need scientists to be much more politically active and engaged. And being the congressman for NIH and NOAA and FDA, I've got a lot of great scientists who live in my district, and I'm constantly pushing them to be more out there, engaged and involved. Any of you guys go to the Science March back in? Yeah, that was good stuff. I make up a new chant for every march we go to, and so for the Science March, my chant was yes to science, yes to reason, no to Trump, and no to treason. So,
yeah, hi, Alex Essex, Western University, Canada. I'm curious about your legislation and how you approach the question of nationality in the context of election technology, because when you are approaching this from the perspective of technology, one of the things you notice is that there is really kind of no nationality in many cases that technology has, or at least it's a highly multinational character. So the internet, for example, is very multinational. You have many parts of it that don't really have a kind of clear country of origin. You have companies that are ostensibly from one country that are actually owned by foreign companies, which are in turn owned by foreign investors.
Correct.
And so I'm just curious how you're approaching this with your legislation.
Well, funny you should ask, because I have another bill that relates to that problem, which is called Get Foreign Money Out, which deals with the problem. When the Supreme Court made its decision in Citizens United back in 2010, its 5-4 decision essentially defining for-profit business corporations as political assemblages of citizens so that money could be spent directly from the corporate treasury in campaigns. It opened the floodgates on corporate spending in politics. And the problem is precisely as you say, that a corporation doesn't exactly have a national identity. It's registered someplace, it's incorporated someplace, but you can have an American corporation that's being controlled by foreign actors or owned by foreign actors. And so the Get Foreign Money Out legislation would say if more than 5% of the company is owned by foreign governments or foreign corporations, then that should be treated as a foreign company and should not be able to put any money into our politics. But the ambiguity that you identify is pretty pervasive for that reason. Now, the bill that I introduced, the Election Vendor Security Act, simply says if the company itself is not registered in America or it's not owned by American citizens, that still allows some wiggle room, but at least it begins to establish the idea of the companies that are running our elections should have legal liability and exposure in the United States.
Paul Stokes from New Mexico. Thank you very much for framing the difference of our election systems versus what goes on in most of the rest of the world, and in particular with regard to your remarks about, I think you termed it a National Election Commission or something like that. I'm thinking about the movement in the country for a national popular vote for president. Now, since we're lacking a National Election Commission, I wonder if you've given any thought to what effect that might have. Suppose the national popular vote movement succeeds. What effect does the way we're structured have on election integrity, and will that result in the development of a National Election Commission or something like that?
Yes. Well, thank you for asking me that question, which is very close to my heart. I introduced the first national popular vote legislation in the country in Maryland, and Maryland became the first state to adopt the national popular vote plan. Now, understand, right now, under the Electoral College system as practiced in the United States, the rest of the country is basically held hostage by electoral corruption and strategic mischief that take place in Florida, right? So Bush got all of Florida's 25 Electoral College votes out of more than 20 million votes cast by winning by a margin of less than 500 votes. That was a situation where they not only disenfranchised more than 800,000 former prisoners lawfully, they threw 17,000 people off the rolls unlawfully because their names resembled prisoners, but they themselves were eligible to vote. There were tens of thousands of other people who were rejected at the polls or falsely purged from the polls, as well as all of the other kind of shenanigans and skullduggery that took place in Florida. Bush he won the winner-take-all electoral college vote in Florida and thereby won the election. So right now, all of us our destinies are intertwined with corruption that takes place in other people's states. Now, the National Popular Vote Plan says, first of all, there's a general conceptual problem with the way we use the electoral college vote because the loser can win. That happened in 2000, where even with all of the corruption in Florida, Gore still beat Bush by more than 500,000 votes. And yet Bush won the election because of the Electoral College the way that Trump won the election in the Electoral College, but lost to Hillary by more than 3 million votes in the popular vote. The National Popular Vote Plan says we're going to create an Electoral College coalition, hopefully of all the states, but we need, in order to activate it, enough states equal to 270 in the Electoral College, so it's effective every time. And then those in the coalition will cast their electors for the winner of the popular vote. Not the winner in our state, but the winner of the national popular vote. That way, we'll use the Electoral College to get to a national popular vote. We do this once or twice in national elections, and then people say the Electoral College really is a relic, it's obsolete, let's get rid of it, and let's just elect presidents the way we elect governors, U.S. senators, mayors, everybody else. Whoever gets the most votes wins. So I do believe, and I think this is an important positive byproduct of the national popular vote, it will force us to look at all of these questions. For example, is it fair that former prisoners are allowed to vote in, I think it's 42 states now, but 8 states, mostly in the former Confederacy, still disenfranchise former prisoners for life? You can never get out of it. And is it fair that, there's a 0.001% error rate in counting ballots in some states and then a 2% rate in other states? No. So in other words, we need national electoral systems. I hope the idea of a national popular vote will lead to a national electoral commission and to a constitutional amendment guaranteeing that everybody have a right to vote and that their votes are counted fairly. So I think it pushes us precisely in that direction. The gains that we've made in terms of democratic reform in American history are gains at the national level, where we say all women should have the right to vote, not just in a particular state that decides to do it, but we shouldn't have race discrimination anywhere in America. And I think we need that same kind of consciousness about electoral systems.
So we take one last question.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Rory Gates from the University of Chicago.
I don't see you. Where are you?
Sorry, right here.
Oh, there you are. Sorry. Yeah.
My question is about the next generation of voting systems and how you think Congress or the federal government can make sure that the science is accurately represented and the public has an accurate picture of what they're getting. Because today we see that in spite of all the problems everyone's talked about at this conference, people are pushing for internet voting, for voting via blockchain, and I'm worried that the same thing that happened with DRE is going to happen again, that the public won't get an accurate picture of what they're getting, and our vote systems are ultimately going to end up being less secure. And I wonder, do you think Congress has a role in kind of showing the public how insecure these solutions are and making sure we don't end up with something even worse?
Yes. Yes. So I return the challenge to you. I'm very eager to hear what the deliberations are, but what I'm looking for is give us a plan. I mean, and let me absorb your plan and give you my thoughts on it. But let's introduce something to do it. Like I say, the progress that we've made in voting systems, the progress we've made in refining and perfecting democracy are almost overwhelmingly at the national level. Now, that's not to diss the states, because a lot of them start at the state level and they bubble up, like the National Popular Vote Plan, like the 19th Amendment. Women were given the right to vote in lots of states before it made it nationwide. But in order to make it complete and to break through, you need to bring it to Congress. So I'm depending on you guys to say, well, look, if assume you have a cooperating Congress, or assume at least you have a cooperating House of Representatives, okay? What is the plan you would like to see America adopt to make sure that our national political autonomy, which is to say our national security, is safe in the new age? Because what is the safety of the country if our elections aren't safe? If our elections can be manipulated, nobody needs to take us on militarily or economically. They can thwart us politically, right? So I send the question back to you. You say, what's Congress's role? I say Congress's role is central, but we need your help. So I look forward to working with you when this conference is over. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Representative.